I'd like to call this October 7th, 2021 regular Board of Education meeting work session to order. Mr. Anagnastu, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Bissell?
Here.
Mrs. Salee?
Here.
Mr. Krupinski?
Here.
Mr. Miko?
Here.
Mrs. Hausen?
Here.
We are all present. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on our agenda is district goals. Our district goals remain the same. Academic achievement and growth, financial prudence, and community engagement, and we measure all of our decisions by those three goals. Next is public comment. I have a few public comments. Kim McGregor Carver, if you'd come to the podium. Name, address, and you have approximately 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Kim McGregor Carver. Address is 10665 King Co. Lane. Good evening. I have spent the past few days trying to come up with a logical argument or some statistic to convince the school board to require universal masking. I looked at statistics and calculated percentages, but the numbers don't fully capture the impact of the risk that's being taken with the health and safety of our community. I'm sure most of you know that there are 183 students and staff that are currently out of school in our district due to a positive test or quarantine. Most of those that are affected will return to school in due time, but I worry about the one person that doesn't. What if a student said goodbye to their favorite teacher for the last time today? What if the future valedictorian of the class of 2033 never makes it to second grade? What if a student's elderly grandparent becomes infected and loses their life? Any of these outcomes could be prevented with just a little extra caution on the part of every individual in this community. Sabrina Coleman was the school secretary at Andrew J. Rickoff Elementary School for 15 years. She died on September 28th after a month-long battle with COVID-19. A.J. Rickoff is part of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, which requires universal masking for all staff and students. Mrs. Coleman was unvaccinated, but her family said that she was very cautious at school to protect herself. The chances that she contracted the virus in the community, but the precautions she took at school may have prevented others from becoming infected. Every day that I walk into the building at Sarar to drop off my son, I am saddened by the lack of care shown for our vulnerable, unvaccinated children. Most staff do not opt to wear masks, even though doing so would be an easy way to protect themselves and our students. The principal, the superintendent, and even many on this board neglect to wear masks that they so strongly recommend that we place on our children. At parent-teacher conferences last night, there were no masking requirements for visitors or staff. Why would we expect our children to do something that their role models refuse to do themselves? I'm certainly not a perfect mask wearer. I often forget to put it on when I get up from my desk at work or when I go to a drive-through, but I try to remember that every little bit of prevention is better than nothing. My son, who has no problem wearing his mask, is only 6. If he gets sick or even has to quarantine, I will lose out on multiple days of work that pays our bills. If I get sick with COVID, I can't care for him or my disabled husband, who relies on me to get in and out of bed, bathe, and administer his medication. If my husband gets sick, he's more susceptible to complications than the average person and could end up hospitalized or worse. I'm asking you, the school board, please take action to prevent further COVID spread in our schools by requiring masks for all. And fellow parents, I am calling on you to act as well. Please look past the effect on your personal freedom and do your part to make the schools safer. If not for your own child, then for that one person whose life could be forever altered by your actions. This pandemic is not over yet. It won't be around forever, and neither will the mask, but the consequences of ignoring it will be permanent. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Kevin Hantak?
Hello again. 8539 Nancy Drive. I'm here again to talk about math, mainly because I'm very persistent. If we were to define the problem statement as what masking policy should be implemented in Strongsville City Schools to maximize in-person learning and minimize community spread within the 2021-22 school year, what options do we have? The options are twofold. First, the current policy being the parental and staff choice model, and the second being a universal masking model. Which model best solves the problem statement to maximize in-person learning? As I and others have previously stated, the public health officials' position at the start of the school year and now on the best approach has been clearly stated: universal masking. As the school year is progressing, an abundance of data is now available to answer this question, with evidence of reduced case counts and quarantines in schools where universal masking policies are in place. Dr. Ryba has this evidence also, as he's been using masking mandates as a stopgap to reduce clusters with his reactive approach. But you all know this already, but you still continue to choose the clearly less effective model. Therefore, this implies that my problem statement must be incorrect. Revising it to better align with your actions would sound more like this: what masking policy should be implemented in Strongsville City Schools to satisfy the majority of what parents and staff want within the 2021 school year? Is this more accurate? Should this really be a popularity contest? Majority or mob rule? As I sat in my daughter's front row desk during conferences last week, 3 feet apart from the parent next to me, center line of head to center line of head, an arm's length from the unmasked teacher in front of me, it was a clear indication to me that the compromise that has already been made by public health officials in order to get back to in-person learning this school year, because of the importance of it. It was even clearer to me why they are proponents of universal masking. Proper, effective social distancing is not possible in the schools. Masks are the mitigation strategy. My daughter, a 3rd grader, interacts with about 5 staff teachers, including her home teacher, her math teacher, and her gym, art, and music teachers. The latest information I've heard on Strongsville staff vaccination rates is approximately 80%. Therefore, statistically, 1 of 5 of those teachers are unvaccinated. None of them wear masks. This doesn't include the other various staff and aides that she encounters on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, it was very interesting that 4 parent-teacher conferences, we were notified by Dr. Ryba that some of the teachers had individual or family health needs that require a more cautious approach, as he put it. And that if we saw a sign on the teacher's door, we were asked to respect their wishes and wear masks. Respecting individual and family health needs in a pandemic. What a concept. Maybe I should put a sign around my daughter's neck asking for staff and other parents to take a cautious approach and respect our individual and family's health needs. The hypocrisy is astounding. Again, I want to recognize and thank all the parents, students, and staff that are following public health recommendations by wearing masks. Please keep doing so. I also want all of you to take note on the universal masking proponents' behavior during all of this. Note the discourse of the arguments. They're evidence-based, logical, and reasonable. There are no megaphones, no obscenities, no pitchforks, no tiki torches, and no threats. Just logic, which one would think would be effective when dealing with educators. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hantak, I appreciate it. Jess Koza?
I'm Jess Koza. I reside at 9812 Hazelwood Avenue. I put in front of each of you a packet that I took the liberty of printing out. You don't need to read it right at this moment. This is for later, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. It's the second guidance given out on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And before you go through it, I had a little printer malfunction, so it didn't print the entire document. It only printed A through D, which is the important part. The rest, you're able to access. It's out in the open on the Department of Education website. The particular section that I wanted to bring to your attention was section C, consideration of special factors. And I don't know if you could see this in your photocopies, but I starred specific questions and specific sections that I really want you to pay attention to. One in particular was, sorry, bear with me, I'm a little slow today. I believe it was question C5. What are some examples of social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health supports related to the COVID-19 pandemic that can be included in the child's IEP? This particular section is really important because you're going to have parents in this district who are going to question this, and they have a right to do that. We have students with underlying medical conditions. If that student requires that their aides or their teachers are to have specific health requirements, the IEP team must figure that out. It would be irresponsible to ignore this section. I bring this to your attention as a mother with a child with special needs. Mine does not have underlying medical conditions. So if you're asking why I'm doing this, even though I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight, they're our friends. They're my son's friends. You know, one in particular today had an episode. Probably wasn't mask related, we're not gonna call it that. But I sat there and I think that's somebody we should be protecting. And I just want you to just do a little homework and read this. The Individuals with Disability Education Act is a very important document that as a school board member or even people running for school board should know. And it's very imperative that you follow it. Thank you.
Jess, thank you for bringing it to our attention. And last on our list is Jamie Lampshire. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you for letting me speak here today. My name is Jamie Lampshire. I reside at 16084 Acacia Drive. I moved here in 2016 with my husband and my 2 children, and I was thrilled with the way we were received in the school district and how things were handled. I felt so proud to live here and that my kids were getting the best education that I could afford for them. In 2021, I feel a lot different. I have a master's degree in healthcare administration. I've worked 20 plus years for a local healthcare organization, and I see statistics day in and day out. Every day, COVID statistics are presented to me, and we must make decisions based on this data. As a parent, it should be safe for me to make assumptions that the school administrators in my district are going to make the best decisions in regards to the health and safety of my child. I'm not going to sit here and kill you with statistics. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm going to come out and I'm going to fight, but I'm going to ask you to reconsider doing what's right for our children. We have some very crucial times coming up. It's going to be the holidays. People are coming home from college. Families are going to gather, whether it's advised to or not, it's going to happen. And I can even say that in my own house. But there are things that we can do better than we're doing today. My 10-year-old was quarantined for an exposure that he had on a Tuesday. I got a phone call on Saturday morning at 9:30 from his principal telling me that he was quarantined. At that point, he would have been well into his infected period at 5 days, and there would have been nothing I could have done about it. On top of that, your staff is calling, the principal of an elementary school is calling me as a parent on a Saturday morning at 9:30. So they're doing contact tracing, and I would hate to see us lose our brightest teachers because they are so stressed out on top of their normal work that they have to track all of this down, call all of these parents, and give away their family time. And that's something realistic that could happen. I have data, but I'm not even gonna talk about it. I think at this point we need to look at the consequences. There are people losing confidence in fiscally responsible decisions. As of September 30th, school districts' immunity has expired for COVID-related lawsuits. There is a measure on the books, House Bill, I think 606, that could renew that, but it's not passed yet. It hasn't been voted on. So all it takes is one kid, one parent, one situation to financially cripple a district. And I don't want to see that happen here, not in my district. And I will end on this note. If you have never, and I look around to the parents in this room, if you have never sat there and tried to save your child's life or save their quality of life, then I implore you to please think about that, because I've been there. My son was 10 months old in the hospital fighting for his quality of life because he was diagnosed with a condition that's 1 in 10,000 children. It's called West syndrome, and the outcomes aren't great. But today, he's a 5th grader. He's doing fantastic. And I don't want him to fall victim to anything else, because I worked my tail off once to save his quality of life. So I implore you to please consider the upcoming seasons and any future waves of our pandemic and really think about the decisions you're making for the kids of your district. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Are there any other public comments? Before we continue to our treasurer's report, just for the community and for our guests here tonight, we're trying something different. One of the things we have discussed previously, especially at our retreat, which was our last meeting, is that our work sessions sometimes have become mini board sessions or mini board meetings. And the work sessions are supposed to be an opportunity for the board, the administration, for the team to be able to work through issues, to kind of get into the matter at hand a little more conversationally and a little more strategically with the admin, teachers, et cetera. So we're trying a different layout. We're trying making it a little easier on our camera people. But please bear with us. The goal is to allow the board and the administration and whoever else is on the team to be able to work through conversationally whatever the topics at hand are. We have a great topic today to go through, but please bear with us as we work through the kinks. And if you have any concerns or any ideas to make it better, let us know. But our goal is to make sure that we honor our commitment to the public, to allow them to easily witness our board meetings, but also to make them more effective for board members and our administrative team. So there's going to be a few kinks along the way, and we'll work through those, but hopefully everyone sees what we're trying to do. And with that said, next is our treasurer's report. George, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. The item I have for tonight is a discussion item. It is the annual budget and 5-year forecast, but as I call it, the budget forecast. This was formally approved by the Board of Ed at the special board meeting on September 23rd, as it needed to be approved by law by September 30th. And I'm presenting it tonight that way because the previous board meeting wasn't videotaped or live streamed, so making it a public presentation and to be recorded. So the annual budget adoption and 5-year forecast. The forecast, as mentioned, is kind of tied to this budget. By law, the forecast does not need to be approved until November and filed with the Ohio Department of Education. So come November, I'll have an updated forecast, which will be based on trends at that time. Our estimated resources for all funds is $112 million. We had a beginning unencumbered balance for all funds of $62.9 million, so giving us a total estimated resources for the year of $175 million. And again, the general fund, which is our main operating fund, is we had an unencumbered balance of $50.9 million, estimated revenues of $81.6 million, giving us total resources of $132 million. As you can see, we have several other funds that make up our total estimated resources and appropriation. These funds are for specific purposes. We have our special revenue funds, debt service, capital improvements, enterprise funds, internal service, and fiduciary funds. And with the estimated resources, we have our annual appropriation. Our annual appropriation for all funds is $107.4 million, with prior year carryover encumbrances of $2.9 million, giving us a total fiscal year 22 appropriation of $110.2 million. And of that, the general fund makes up the fiscal year 22 appropriation of $76.4 million, with carryover encumbrances of $2.2 million, giving us a total fiscal year 22 appropriation of $78.5 million. For the general fund, I've been doing this slide for the past few years, taking the total budget of the general fund and breaking it down by what we call our function code, and to get a per pupil amount and how it's divvied up, how the general fund is essentially divvied up by the specific functions of the district. So as you can see, our instruction makes up the biggest piece of the pie of regular instruction. 41.1% of the budget goes to regular instruction. 14.5% of the budget goes to special education, and 1% goes to vocational ed. And then you can see our related support services, extracurricular activities. Then overall, our per pupil amount for the general fund to the budget is $13,532. And it's a slight decrease from last year's budget by $230. So kind of moving forward into the 5-year forecast, what I like to do once we do the budget is, all right, how does our budget line up to the 5-year forecast? Can we support the current budget? Within the 5-year forecast, we have our major assumptions, general fund revenues, general fund expenditures, and then a summary at the end. So our major assumptions, beginning with revenues, our biggest revenue source is property taxes. The forecast assumes a 3-year average of our gross collection rate of 98.85%. Last year we had a slight decrease to 96.85 from the prior years, but that had more to do with some exempt classifications that kind of skewed it a little bit. So the 3-year average is a good number to move forward with. Also, with revenue collections, we have our assessed valuations. Collection year 2022, which is next calendar year, is a triennial budget for Cuyahoga County. I know there's been some recent news, in the news that the city of Strongsville will increase by 15% in residential values and 5% in commercial values. And I also want to provide a little clarity of what this means. Will people be paying more taxes? Will we be receiving more taxes? It depends. It depends on what your increase is. So there's a factor called House Bill 920, and what House Bill 920 means as assessed valuations increase or decrease, the effective rate of that millage essentially increases or decreases with it. So as values go up, the effective rate is going to decrease to ensure that we're still receiving the same level of funds that we were before. If the valuations decrease, the effective rate will increase, but it can only increase to the original passage of the levy. So it can't. So for example, if a levy was six mills and the valuation dropped significantly, it can't. The effective rate can't go any higher than 6 mills. The good thing for us, we're not in that situation. We're in an opposite situation where values are going up and the effective rate is decreasing. And how it impacts each individual homeowner, it really depends on where you are within the average. So the city of Strongsville is at 15. The average increase for residential is at 15%. If you're below that 15%, you're probably going to see a decrease in your taxes. If you're above that 15%, you might see an increase based on how much you are above the 15% incrementally. So at the end of the day, we receive about the same amount of funds that we received prior, and how it's spread out is just, on who's paying for it is just a little different. It's just, they kind of refigure out where the funds are coming from. The portion that we receive additional income from is the 5.6 mils of inside millage, which is not subject to the effective rate. And public utility values are estimated to increase by 6.97%, which has been the historical average. So before I move on, any questions on assessed values and how that impacts the effective rate? All right, with revenues, with the sale of the mall, the forecast does assume a decline in the assessed value for that property. It was also factored in with the county's triennial update. So overall, even with the impact of the mall, commercial property increased by 5%, which includes the impact of the mall. However, there is a Board of Revisions complaint with the mall based on prior tax years. The forecast does assume a $2.2 million refund for tax years 18, 19, 20 due to the open revision complaint, and this amount is based on the worst case scenario. So hopefully we find out more on that sooner than later. And then lastly, the district does have 2 renewal levies. One is expiring at the end of next calendar year, and in May of 2019 we had a 5-year 5.9 mil levy that will expire at tax year 2023 with collections through 2024. State funding, there is a new funding formula that was approved under the biennium state budget for the fair funding formula, which is under House Bill 110. We're still awaiting the funding formula from ODE. They haven't, although there's been several simulations, and there's a simulation I've been working on to prepare the forecast. ODE still hasn't released it. They were supposed to release each individual districts on October 1st, but due to the complexity and the mass overhaul of the change, they sent out a message last week that they're delaying it to December 1st. So we're still being funded based on prior formula, and we'll receive the new one December 1st. So I'm basing everything on the current simulations that I have and modeling that's available to us. And with that, just one last point with the state funding formula. As you will see in the forecast and the upcoming slides, the state funding may look like it has decreased compared to prior years in total, but what happened was, if you recall in the past, there were pass-through funds that were given to the districts for community schools, open enrollment, and non-public vouchers. So those were counted as part of our revenues and then deducted as part of our expenses. With the change in the funding formula, those dollars are now going to be funded directly to those schools and not passed through us. So that's why it's going to appear that we have a decrease in revenue, but the net is still the same.
And so we'll want to be able to report the net to the community once
Correct.
once we have that information.
Yeah, for the November presentation, I want to get into more details about the components of the state funding formula. Personnel trends, and this is for all funds, not just the general fund. We have budgeted about 765 positions, really 765.04, and that's based on percentages of FTE on that 0.4, but overall, these are all funds, and it's an increase of 36 positions from 2021. And majority of the increases are due to the additional federal grants that we received for specific needs. And then as you can see in the pie chart below, of our funding, about 48.6% is teachers, and then the rest are the support staff throughout the district. Staffing expenditures for the general fund now. Of the total, 765, 685 were within the general fund, which is 7 FTE increase from the prior year. All the forecast assumes all union agreements as they currently are. The healthcare premiums increased by 3% in fiscal year 21, and for 2022, the district experienced a 1.37% increase. And for fiscal years 23 to 26, the projected increase is 8%, which is kind of the industry standard. And during fiscal year 20 and 21, we did experience some cost savings within certain categories, substitute costs, overtime, benefits that are associated with salary, and certain purchase services due to school closures. And as we resume normal operations, those benefits and expenditures will be restored.
George, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Looking at the numbers of staff you have here, how do you decide how much to increase the staffing? Like I'm looking at 23, we have 688.
Oh, the 3 and then the 691?
Correct.
Those are for some of the positions that are either on grants that are going to come off the grant and be absorbed within the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Purchase services, the forecast is going to show a 1.5 million decrease from 21 to 22. And again, that's due to what I was talking about earlier about the state funding formula with those pass-through dollars coming out. So as state funding as revenue was reduced, expenditures were reduced as well. And then material supplies, we're going to see a 811,000 increase from fiscal year 21 to 22, which is due to fiscal year 21 savings or unspent budget, and material supplies make up about 3.1% of the general fund budget. And then I also want to touch on this. This was a slide that I had. Last 5-year forecast, thought it was important to keep in, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the following budget adjustments were made within the budget. For fiscal year 21, which was last school year, we had increased $600,000 for remote learning and SES Connects. That was fiscal year 21 only. For fiscal year 22, we were able to utilize some ESSER funds to continue any remote learning. The next bullet point, Strongsville Online Academy Solo. Fiscal year 21, $535,000 was from the general fund, and then for fiscal years 22 to 23, we're utilizing $275,000 of ESSER 3 funds. PPE supplies and equipment, we increased the operations budget by $250,000 to accommodate those. Custodial staff, we increased by 31 hours. It impacted salary and benefits. And then transfer of funds. Last year for food service, we needed to do a $455,000 transfer. This year, I don't have a transfer in there for food service. Food service has been doing really well with participation rate, especially with the free lunches. So as every lunch served helps. So again, just as a reminder, lunches and breakfasts are free. So we encourage everyone to utilize that. And then the last bullet point, due to unprecedented times of the pandemic, we will need to monitor the following areas for fluctuations of sub-costs, solo costs, PPE supplies, athletics, and food service. And then the additional grant funding. Last year we received the ESSER 1 funds, which have been used, and they were utilized for kindergarten Chromebooks, Chromebook cases in grades 2 to 5, solo hardware and software for remote instruction. We also received coronavirus relief funding during last school year of $285,000, which have been fully utilized for PPE supplies, materials, and equipment, elementary, middle school desks for social distancing and disinfection sprayers. We also had the Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grant of $21,000. We utilized for public Wi-Fi transportation hotspots. And lastly, we have the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding, which are being utilized this school year through school year 2024, which is due to, we used for summer programming over the past year, staffing, additional software programs that we're able to continue that were initially funded from ESSER 1, professional development, equipment and supplies, and we also have in the budget a capital improvement for HVAC as well with ESSER 3. So kind of moving into revenues, where the money comes from, as mentioned before, 74% comes from local taxes, or 60.5, about $61 million of the total. 76 million comes from property taxes. How do property taxes look over the 5-year forecast? In fiscal year 2023, that's the first year if the current levy is not renewed, the funding comes off, and you can see in the orangish color how it impacts the chart. Public utility, that portion of property tax has been increasing each year as the value of the public utilities have been increasing within the city, and public utility is not subject to the effective rate as well, so it's based on the full levy amount. State foundation, this is where I was kind of talking about the dip from, you see 20 in, we did see an increase in 2021 from 2020, but recall in 2020, we did get state funding reduced because of the COVID-19 pandemic, where the governor reduced every school district's budget based on the uncertainty at the state level, and then in 2021 it was restored, and then we see the dip in 2022, but essentially that dip is due to the pass-through funds coming out and not any portion of the districts being reduced. And then there is also another $150,000 reduction that was just being moved from unrestricted state foundation to restricted foundation. So moving on to the next chart, this is the restricted. As you can see, our prior restricted state aid was $72,000. Now it's $209,000. And what it is with the state funding formula, there's 4 restricted types of revenue. In the prior formula, there were only 2, and those are. So the prior formula, the restricted funds were for economically disadvantaged of about $46,000, and career tech of $23,000. Those amounts are still the same, but we also, with the new funding formula, we used to receive the wellness funds, and those used to come in a separate bucket. Now these are part of the state funding formula, and they're included in the formula, and they are restricted. Of that amount, $93,000 is the restricted amount that we at least have to spend to. And also gifted is also now a restricted portion, and the amount that we have to spend for gifted is $46,000, which in all these areas we're well above the restricted amount. But we just have to record the revenues as restricted. Our property tax allocation, this is the homestead and rollback. As you can see over the years, it's been pretty consistent. The orange is the renewal levy. If the levy doesn't pass, those are the funds that come off. The decrease from 17 to 18 is due to the prior TPP dollars that we received. Once this 5-year forecast cycle is over, those dollars will be off the charts. Other revenues, these are made up of majority of them are TIF revenues, catastrophic costs, tuition, Medicaid reimbursements, and all the other revenues that are not classified in the other buckets. And then any financing sources, these are ones you can't really rely on every year. In 2021, it was a big increase of $1.3 million, but that was due to the Bureau of Workers' Compensation premium and dividend refunds. So those aren't revenues you can rely on every year. Any questions on revenues before I move into expenditures? No. So expenditures, where the money goes. 84% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits. I know that might seem like a little bit of an increase to prior where we were about 79 to 80%. And really the difference is because of that tuition pass-through that's no longer in the budget. So those purchase services aren't as high. So it just brought up salary and benefits a little bit, but it had nothing else to do besides that portion, that 1.5 million coming out of the budget. So 64 million of salaries and benefits, and then purchase services, which is our second highest part of the budget, which is 6.6 million or 8.7%. Salaries are expected to spend 46.1 million for fiscal year 22. The increase is based on the negotiated contracts and the additional positions that came onto the general fund this year, and then also 2021 had we saw some savings there based on the school closures due to overtime, sub-costs, and other factors. Benefits, this includes medical, retirement pension, any related fringe benefit. General fund's budgeted to spend about 18.3 million. And again, the increase is related to, one, the increase in the healthcare costs, but also the additional positions and salary increases as well. Purchase services, this is where we see the dip due to the state funding change, where last year we spent about 1.2 million, and this year it's budgeted at 6.6 million. Supplies and materials, although it just shows a big increase, I mean, the chart may show a larger increase, but remember, this is only 3% of our budget, and in total, it's $2.3 million for fiscal year 22, where we spent 1.6 in 2021. Again, it was due to budget savings, where some of the budget is not spent 100%. This category we have, this is where textbooks are paid from, fuel for the buses, maintenance, parts for the buses, instructional supplies, and any other related supplies as well. Capital outlay, equipment, we have 878 budgeted for fiscal year 22, 500 of which is under technology. General fund debt, we have 2 debt issues. One's going to expire in 2024, and this is the 2 debt issues are the ones on the general fund. We have 2 other ones. One is in the PI fund, and then the middle school debt is in the 002 bond retirement fund. These are just the general fund debt. Other objects, we're looking to spend about $1.2 million for fiscal year 22, and the biggest expenditure source is county auditor fees for the collection of property taxes. Lastly, the other financing sources, which is made up of transfers and advance out to other funds. In fiscal year 2021, we did have a slight increase due to the increase for the food service transfer. Fiscal year 2022, estimating about $435,000 to transfer out, which is made up of $250,000 to the termination benefit fund. I was conservative. I added $50,000 for athletics, not knowing how the gates were going to be, so we'll see if that's needed or not. There is no food service, so we might have to watch that, but hopefully that stays on course. That would be exciting not to have food service transfer, so we'll see how that ends up at the end of the year. And then the other is the transfers for the turf savings fund. So to kind of bring it together, there's two charts. This chart first shows the impact by moving the renewal levies to the bottom, taking them out of revenues, which is how we have to report them to the state, and then adding them back. We're taking them out of revenues on the top and then adding them back on the bottom. But the key for me is looking at our revenues over expenditures, where we're at. For fiscal year '22, with this current budget, we'll have $5.2 million of revenues over expenditures. This is if the budget is spent at 100%, and this is a budget forecast. And if the levy is not renewed, then you can see how in fiscal years '24 to '25, we're kind of spending into the cash deficit, or we're spending into the cash balance, which, if it continues, would be unsustainable. And then the next chart shows with all the revenues up top, how does the forecast look? And if the levies were to continue, we would have a sustainable future through 2026. So that concludes my presentation, if there's any questions.
I'm just trying to figure out the difference between September and May 2021.
Sorry?
Like September 21, May 21.
Oh, that's just
A heading typo?
heading typo.
Is it supposed to be 22 in May? Like what is it?
No, that's supposed to just read September.
Oh, they're supposed to both say.
Say September.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the
The
difference
first-
between the
the-
chart is the renewal levies are included in the revenue line, versus not being broken on the bottom.
Thank you.
Sorry about it, I didn't even.
Well,
I've
that's
looked at it
okay.
several times and
I
didn't
was
catch
like,
it.
oh, look at how great he was in his forecast from May to September.
So George, I think this is a good time. We have been communicating to the public that if the levy is renewed, we will be able to be financially prudent 2025 to 2026.
Yeah, so, well, based on this chart, if it continues, in 2026, we'll have revenues over expenditures by $1.6 million. And then in 2027, or 26, 27, we'll begin spending the cash balance down.
Right. So the message that I want to share is, you know, before, when we started our communication about the levy, it was through I always get tongue-tied, through 2025, 2026. And because of one of our goals and following one of our goals, which is financial prudence, we now can safely say that renewal of the levy will let us be financially prudent and sound beyond 2025, 2026.
Right.
You know, compared to years past, we are in an excellent financial condition. We intend to remain in that financial condition. For myself, I just want to share that, you know, we look at these funds as funds that our job is to be stewards of it. It's not our money. It's the taxpayers' money that they entrust to us, and we thank them for entrusting it to us so that we can educate our community and the students in our community. But we get it. It's not our money. We're stewards of that money, and we're committed to spending it wisely. In years past, the problem was how do we deal with deficits, and how do we deal with not being in a good financial condition? Going forward, I think the goal or our commitment is to make sure we maintain that and not get into a situation where, oh, we're in a great financial condition, let's spend money hand over fist. We're still going to be wise with the taxpayers' dollars and continue to be good stewards. At least that's my opinion. Any other questions or comments?
I would just like to commend our treasurer. I know that there's a lot of work that went into this presentation. I know that you have received awards that I've read about previous to becoming a board member, and I can see why. The analysis, the clarity, and the presentation itself, since most of us are visual learners, is very much spot on. And I think I commend you for that. So thank you.
I appreciate it.
Nice job, George.
Thanks.
If there's any other questions, our next item on the agenda is Superintendent's report. Dr. Ryba is missing.
He's not missing. He's just not present today.
We know where he is.
We do know where he is.
So I turn it over to Mrs. Pelko for superintendent's report, or assistant superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Micco. So under the superintendent's report this evening, we have a presentation, as you shared at the beginning of the meeting. Want to kind of work through some of the things that we're doing in our district, and especially with our younger learners in regard to reading instruction. And so at our board retreat, under our goal, under the board's goal of academic and student achievement, our initiatives with reading and kind of transforming the way we're teaching reading instruction in our elementary schools. We've started already a few years ago, and we're continuing with that and even going further with the initiatives we have planned this year. So with no further ado, I want to introduce to you, we have Mr. Steve Owens, who is one of our elementary literacy coaches here with us tonight. We have Amy Pinney, who is our supervisor of elementary curriculum, and Aaron Green is here as well as our director of curriculum, and they have prepared a wonderful presentation to just give the board a deeper understanding of all the things we are doing with reading instruction in our district. So I will let them take over.
Well, thank you. Give us just a second to get signed in here and situated.
So just one more thing, as they're getting situated here, they do have a lengthy presentation. There's a lot of details. However, if you have questions throughout, feel free to ask those. And if it's something they're going to get to, they may say, we'll get to that. But as they go through, if you have questions, feel free to ask.
I wouldn't say lengthy.
Oh, sorry.
Negative connotation.
Detailed.
Fabulous. Okay. All right, so thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity to present. I brought in two of our heavy hitters here to present with me tonight. As Mrs. Pelko said, we are focused on elementary reading and what we're doing this year with regard to that. So I'm going to give a very quick overview of what you'll hear from first Steve Owens and then secondly from Amy Pinney. We're going to first talk about letters training and what we're doing in the district grades K through 3. A little bit about what is it, why are we invested in it, and what's it going to do for our kids, and then how does that translate to what we're doing in the classroom? So with what work Amy is doing, what does that change in the lives of kids? So just a couple quick notes on my end before I turn it over to Steve. Letters training is based on the science of reading, which 3 years ago, I had never heard. Ohio was pretty silent, if you will, on that as well, because it's a newer, it's not new, but it's newly caught on because it works. So if you recall, 4 years ago, we received a grant called the Striving Readers Grant, and it was a $1.2 million grant. With that money, we hired 3 elementary literacy coaches. The coaches have spent a ton of time getting versed in the science of reading, doing letters training, and we have been able to implement a lot of the pieces and components that we've learned. So Haggerty, if you've heard of that, it's a huge piece in the classroom. I won't get into too many details, but it's based on the science of reading, and it's making gains in our students. So the other piece of the letters training that we are looking to address is Ohio has dyslexia laws that are soon to be in place, House Bill 436. It hasn't specifically indicated that letters will be an approved training, but by all accounts, I would highly think it will be because it is one of, if not the best trainings out there. So we will be proactive, we'll be on the cutting edge of having our staff trained already prior to even the dates needed by law. And then with the curriculum, the standards and mapping, the goal here, as Amy will talk about, is we need to understand explicitly what we are to be teaching. So not just to kind of understand what the standards are, but really break them down and to what depth should everybody be teaching so it's consistent across grade levels or across buildings in the same grade level. So I am at this point going to turn it over to Steve Owens, who is, like I said, he's been he was already letters trained. He has spent the last month or so getting deeply trained to be a letters facilitator, which is a ton of work. So I compliment and applaud him for doing that. And at this time, Steve, go ahead. And part of this is interactive, so get ready.
Be ready.
Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm going to keep my mask on if you can. If you can't, just wave at me and I'll do better. Okay. So yeah, again, thank you for having me here. Again, my name is Steve Owens. I'm one of the literacy coaches in the elementary schools. I work primarily out of Whitney. I'm pretty excited about being here, so I wore my lucky pin. This is my I Love the Science of Reading pin. In fact, I misplaced mine, so Erin was nice enough to give me one of the many hiding in her junk drawer. But hopefully this will give us good luck today. As we said, there's some interactive things that we're going to do. Thank you. And this can be some heady stuff. So I always like to start my activities with my students doing something nice and interactive. So I thought, why not do a read-aloud? And what better read-aloud to do right now than something that's kind of seasonal? I know we don't all celebrate Halloween, and that's okay. Very okay. But I thought, why not do something a little bit fall-y, right? Or fallsy, if we will. Okay, so you will have, and I'm going to see if I can clickety-click here, this a Know Nothing Halloween packet. So if you could find it in your folder, please. I'm going to put it on the board here as well. And if I happen to not navigate so well, I will always ask for someone to tag in for me. But what I thought I'd do is what we always do in our classes is I'm going to read the first couple pages aloud to you because that's a nice way for you to get acclimated, then I'll call on some people. So if you wouldn't mind following along, I'll start reading. So we have here a Know Nothing Halloween tricks. Look at that picture. Oh, look at that dog. I'm going to begin reading here. You can see I'm going to start, whoopsies, start right here. So follow along, please. Once there were 4 friends named Boris, Morris, Doris, and Norris. They were best friends. Okay, go ahead and turn the page for me, please. Let's read on. We're going to learn more about Boris, Doris, Norris. All right, here we go. Next page. One day, Norris said, "Look here. It's a note for us. It's from Doris," said Morris. "I will read it," said Norris. I'll read one more page, and I'm going to call on one of you. I'm sure you're excited, so let's go ahead one more time. Here we go. "Dear friends, today is Halloween. I have got to get something. I will be back soon. Love, Doris." "Good reading, Norris," said Boris. Okay, so we've gotten a chance to practice. I'm going to call on someone else to read for me right now, if you wouldn't mind. Okay? So let's see. Laura, would you read for me the next page, if you wouldn't mind? We're all going to follow along, though, because I'm going to call on some of you next. Right here.
Michelle said she understands.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to call on you next, Michelle, but if you wouldn't mind. Now, go right ahead. Okay, so you're struggling. Okay, don't worry, I'm going to help you. So what we like to do in our class is let's cover up all the letters except for the first letter, and let's think what word might start with that letter sound, and we'll make a guess. Can you do that? Does that work?
So cover all the letters.
Cover all the letters except for that first one. Think what word would start with that letter? Make that. No? Okay, don't worry. I got a plan. I've got so many tricks in my sleeves. Don't worry. Let's look at the picture. Okay, the picture will help us. Look at the picture, and now let's think. What would the word be? Ooh, no, so close. Okay, I got a better idea. Let's just skip that word, and we'll go on to the next word. Go ahead, read the next one, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so nothing's helping. Can anyone here help, or are we all kind of lost right now? Kind of lost, right? So, and that's okay.
Just like what's happening.
You're like, what, am I in a dream world, right? What is going on? And I'm glad. Because what I've done so far is I've given you what we used to call the 3 cueing system. Let's look at the first letter in a word. We'll start to make guesses, right? Let's look at a picture. Let's start to make guesses, right? Let's skip that word. We'll come back to it. What we've learned is authors don't make words in there for nothing, right? We're not frivolous with the words. They're all important. We can't just skip words. Would it help if I would have told you what those letters really were? In other words, I gave you our alphabet and I had a correspondence. So if I would have given you something like this, and I told you, and it's hard to see here, but each of these symbols, what the letter was. And you could use the sounds you know for those letters, and then you could start reading it. Is that the most efficient way? Probably. Okay. Now, I'm going to go to the next, if I may. the next slide here, I want us to just think for a minute. How does this experience we just had, and I'm sorry I picked on one person, but I know I was there too. Right. How does this relate to the way that reading has traditionally been taught? The cues I gave you, do they seem, not the text itself, but the cues, did they seem familiar to you? You've heard them before, but the text seemed foreign, right? Okay, so I want you to think about that. How does that relate to how I was traditionally taught? Raise your hand if you heard those cues before as a kid, or they don't sound crazy. Look at the picture, look at the first or second sound, or letter, I should say. Skip the word, we'll come back to it. Now, what we just did, it's not to cast aspersions on any teacher, because I did the same things. Until, like Aaron said, I was lucky enough to start. But, whoa.
That was me.
Oh, that was you. Thank you. I was like, what? Yeah. Thank you. But having said that, is there something that we saw there that kind of threw a monkey wrench into everything? Because we realized you were put in a situation where you didn't understand what I was trying to convey to you. The cues I was giving you didn't help, did they? And for a lot of our students, they feel just like that. When they look at those letters, it might as well just look like that to them. They're not connecting those symbols with the sounds, and therefore they can't decode, right? So is there something we can do to change this for some of our students? Because some of our students are going to get it no matter what. They're just naturally more gifted, and they're more inclined to be able to break the code, right? But some of our students, in fact, many of our students can't, and we leave them on an island, just like you felt. Now imagine, that was weird, right? For however long that was, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but it might have felt even longer for you. Imagine coming to school every day, and that happens. That struggle keeps persisting. Not only are you not reading, you're not accessing knowledge. And not only are you not accessing knowledge, you don't like reading. So now you've just taken this, which should be amazing. It's a beautiful civil right we have to be able to read, to access knowledge. In fact, not to get on a soapbox, but people's freedoms have been taken away simply by denying them the ability to access print and read and write. Imagine getting that robbed from you and what that does to you as a learner, as a human being. We want to do better, right? So having said that, as we think here, what can we do to change this experience for not all, because some of our students can do this, but for many of our students? And that's where we're going to go next. Now, the next activity isn't an activity, it's just kind of an analogy, okay? So I'm going to flip to the next slide. If you wouldn't mind, I don't know if Aaron wants to do this, because you were... We're going to watch Who Likes Wheel of Fortune? Oh man, Mr. McCoy, not so much. Okay, maybe you'll like this one, okay? We're going to watch, these are the unintended results again of reading instruction the traditional way, the way that we just talked about. So it's one clip, if you don't mind.
Magic hand, magic band, magic yan, zan, band, can, jan, pans, fan, fans, win, wand, oh!
And you can stop the clip. Yeah, so when we don't give our kids the tools to decode, a lot of our kids, it may as be like those letters aren't even there. And they're left going when we say make a guess. Hand, band, wan, sand, fan, fan. They're not even making up words that make sense. They feel like they're lost. There's a sense of panic, not only for the student, but for the teacher. I know for myself, I didn't know what to do for a lot of our students like this. And I felt pressure myself, anxiety myself. I wasn't my best self for those students. I wished I knew what to do. Now, the good news is there is something we can do, and we're going to get there. Before we do, this simulation we did and this little video we showed, they're not rare. In fact, nationally, only 35% of our fourth graders nationally are able to read at proficiency at fourth grade. Now, having said that, that's not, again, to cast any dispersions on a teacher. Teachers are amazingly talented. I came from Strongsville. I'm a proud graduate of Strongsville. And it was 1997, so I'm getting old. But when I went into college, I was set up, when I sat in those classrooms, I was set up to succeed. I was in a better place than a lot of other kids sitting in my classrooms. And I'd like to think I'm pretty smart, but it wasn't because I was a genius. It was because I had great teachers. I had amazing teachers that came from this district, many of whom still work here. But there's a saying, when we know better, we do better. I like when we know more, we can do even more. So right now, our teachers that are coming into not only our district, but all the districts nationally, are coming without these skills that we're going to talk about just in a moment. 51% of the higher education teaching programs.
Do we know what our number is?
From this past, it was 84% of our
Right.
testing, that's tested students.
And I will say there's a lot of different ways to measure proficiency, but yes. In fact, 35% nationally, we're doing a lot better than that. But we want to get up to like the 90, 95%. I'll show you that in just a moment. 50, and that's a great question.
Any other, and do we know what our teaching staff is?
Of the 51% like that, that is a great question.
Those are college programs that are
Yes.
teaching the science of reading. So local colleges, I don't know specifically. I know a handful are working toward that.
Good enough.
Yeah, and it's a very newer concept in school. Again, I graduated, this is my 20th year teaching, so 20 years ago. I was an intervention specialist come in, so I had a little bit more of this, but it was a sliver of what it is now. But yes, only 51% of higher education college programs right now are teaching about the science of reading. So if you don't know what you should be teaching, it's just like being a student that doesn't know the code, right? So we need to not only equip our students, but we need to equip our staff, right? So again, as it says here, unless we're trained in the science of reading, the teachers across the country, not just here, are often instructing without all the knowledge and skills that they need so that they can teach all students, not just some, not just most, all students how to read. Again, that's going to lead to what I said before, those comprehension struggles to persist. The gaps are going to continue to widen as more content is being taught in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and onward. And then we're going to have those struggles getting worse and worse for our students. Their motivation is going to become lower and lower. Their access to knowledge becomes less and less. And they're ending up being less successful, not only in reading, but in all the other areas where they need to access that knowledge. Now, that's a bummer, and that's a downer, and I don't want you to leave here going, man, that was a really awful way to leave here on Thursday. I'm not leaving you like that. We have not only hope, we have a plan, and that's where we're going to go next. So if you wouldn't mind, I like you clicking. You're the
All right,
best.
I'm glad to click.
I'm going to do my classic take a swig. This gives you a chance to soak it all in as I take my swig of water here.
Love this guy.
Okay, so the research says, through explicit systematic instruction using the science of reading, 95% of all students can achieve reading proficiency by the 3rd grade. Now that's within 3 years of implementing this with fidelity. Letters is one of those ways to implement the science of reading with fidelity. So, letters will allow our teachers to provide this type of instruction, making sure all students are given access to the knowledge, experiences, and opportunities they need through the written word. Now, I must say, you might be thinking, what is letters? And I didn't get into this, and I apologize. Letters is not a curriculum. Letters is not a program per se. What it is what they call a robust professional development course. It gives the teachers deeper knowledge, skills, and practice to help you deliver that effective literacy instruction. That's research-based. And not only research-based, it's based on brain science, what the brain actually does, what parts of the brain are firing in a successful reader, and how we get those parts of the brain successfully firing for all readers. Now, when it says 95% of all students, I'm going to lead into that in the next slide, but the 5% that won't necessarily achieve success, what they found, those are your students who have a significant cognitive disabilities. But that doesn't mean they can't still grow. But that's only the 5% of the students who have significant cognitive disabilities. So our students who have maybe a little reading delay, or they're identified as having specific learning disability, they can and will achieve proficiency in reading if we implement this successfully, with fidelity. Would you mind going to the next? Now, you might say, okay, well, is there any evidence of that nearby? And there happens to be. So if you look here, I know it's hard to see, but not too far from where many of us might have traveled, or maybe some of us have friends that live there, we have the School of Niles City Schools. They have implemented letters, and by that I mean they've trained their staff in letters, in the district's K-3 schools, and the district's K-3 students are now reading at or above average. Now, how many kids? They went from 56% kids reading at or above average, or I should say at or above proficiency, I apologize, to 87% in 1 year. A 31% increase after implementing letters and the science of reading as taught through letters. So they measured that, by the way, through their Dibbles Next scores, which is like our AIMSWeb scores. So in 1 year, not 3, they went from 56% to 37%. I would say that's a pretty good jump. And I looked it up just so I could see. Niles has a population of students who have a lot more kids coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. Their school has less than we have to offer. And that isn't saying that their schools can't achieve. That's saying that they're doing it with maybe less resources, but with solid strategies. So if they can do it in a district that has fewer resources than us, we can definitely do it. So what is letters and what is it not? So just so we know, again, it's not a curriculum. This is a way of teaching the science of reading. Okay? It's not a curriculum in and of itself, but it's the means through which sound reading instruction takes place. It's not a fad. We've been through a lot of fads. I don't want you to sit here and go, okay, I heard stuff like this before. We did something like this 5 years ago, and we did something a little different than this 6 years ago, and we're coming back to this today, and then next year it's going to be something else. This is not a fad. This is steeped in research. It's not devoid, and this is another thing. I don't want teachers to think, oh, okay, so you're going to give me a script, and I have to do a formula, and I'm going to be a robot. No. What this does is it gives you the knowledge you need to be the best teacher you can be. Like I said, we have amazing teachers. Look at me. Amazing teachers. When they put all of their energy and talents into what is proven to work, there is no limit to where we can go. It's going to be amazing. It makes me just want to take this button and just shine it up in the world and say, I love this science. Okay? Also, not only is this not a one-size-fits-all method, it's aligned with the science of reading that allows you to see what a student needs in a specific area at a specific time and do the best thing that you can for that student. Now, we know through brain research how brains develop. We know how reading really develops in a strong reading mind. So the things that we want to do for a student who has maybe dyslexia or is struggling with reading would be the same things that we'd want to do for any of our students because it's what strong readers do, but we might do them at a different rate, or somebody might be at a different level. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and like you're all going to be having to do the same thing at the same time, but they're going to be doing things at their level, using what we know to be the best, most sound strategies for teaching. Lastly, I like this, and I like to think of myself as a little bit of an energetic person. I don't know if you caught that. I don't like things that are boring. And you might think, oh, science reading sounds boring. It is not. It's connected with structured literacy. So in other words, it's not just phonics. It's not just phonemic awareness and integrity. What it is, it's those lower level skills, what we call our foundational skills that we need to have, but we touch on vocabulary, background knowledge, making inferences, sound comprehension strategies, all of it. It's not just phonics. And again, like I said, it's not boring. You want to know what's boring? Not being able to read something. Sitting there and staring at something and trying to make a guess of what it says. That was probably pretty boring. And if you did it every day, and I apologize for that, on a Thursday like this. But if you had to do that every day, it would be boring. But if I told you there's a way to fix this, man, the opportunity to just access knowledge would be exciting. So that's what it is and isn't. I want to tell you a little bit more about how letters works, because I mentioned it's not just phonics or phonemic awareness. So letters is based on what we call the simple view of reading. Thank you, Aaron. And the simple view of reading is just, it's not exactly simple what the brain is doing, but they break it down to its most component parts. And if you like math, you'll like this. It's a multiplication problem. Basically, it's in order to have reading comprehension, it's your ability to decode words multiplied by your ability to understand language spoken. In other words, if I can understand everything you're saying, you can read a story to me and I got it. I can tell you the characters, I can tell you analysis of how the plot went, all that good stuff. But if you put that story in front of me, it looks like what we have on the board, you have no reading comprehension. Flip that. I can read all of this like a dream, but it's written in another language and I don't know any of the words and what they mean. I don't know how a story works. I don't know the genre. I have no connection to how the sentences are intertwined. I don't have reading comprehension. You need both. So again, it's making sure we put enough emphasis on all those areas so that we can be strong readers. Next slide, please. So really quickly, the decoding part, what we would be trying to instruct our teachers on and give them strategies for would be these areas of decoding or word reading. So we'd want to work on our phonics and word recognition, our phonological awareness, which is just the understanding of sounds, everything from how many words are in a sentence to how many syllables are in words, all the way down to each individual sound or phoneme, so they can break it down, hear each sound, blend it together, separate them, manipulate them. We also want to work on our fluency, the rate, accuracy, and the way we deliver those lines. So those are the basics of that, what we call the lower end of the rope, those foundational skills that you want to develop in K1 and 2. The language comprehension is going to consist of all those higher level skills that you're going to teach in all grades. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely, sorry.
Does the yellow mean anything?
No, what that's doing is it's showing you some of the bigger areas for fluency. So you need to understand how print works left to right, the print concepts, the sounds, so that's phonological awareness. Then your phonics is taking those sounds and connecting to the letters. And then finally, the word knowledge is, now I recognize that word, I own that word, I can read it like this. And all those make the fluency part. Sorry about that.
The size of the box is
They just didn't have enough room. That's a good question.
I want to make sure
Yeah,
that
no.
we're not saying phonics and
No.
word recognition has a higher importance than the other, or time spent or what have you.
Now, I do want to say, that's an awesome question, and you're like going to my next class, because in certain grades, that is true. So in the younger grades, we do all of these things we're mentioning, but because it's so essential to break the code so that they can access print, you do spend some more time on phonics, and you spend some more time on phonemic awareness, so they can build that sense up. So you will spend more time on it, but I don't think that's why those boxes are like that. It's just, but in all levels, you're still doing both ends of this equation, if that makes sense. So with language comprehension, this is where I think teachers may have had a misunderstanding before. Oh, we're just going to be teaching phonics all day. No. We're going to be teaching background knowledge, vocabulary, how to make inferences, understanding language in each of your genres. All of those things, academic language. So what words am I using in science versus what I'm using in social studies, versus what I use in math. All these things are so integral to being a sound reader. So we're going to teach those as well. And not only teach them, we're going to teach them with the best, most explicit, most research-based strategies so that all students can learn. So that's the background. I did it really quickly. We can talk about it more if you want, but I wanted to just give you a nutshell. And I was told this is going to happen soon, so I don't want this to happen. I think Jenny's going to do a tornado soon.
Maybe
So
keep going.
I don't want, and I thought that might be a yoo-hoo, you're doing great, but I think it's, so. I want to respect your time. But we have a plan. So that's the basics of what letters is and is not. But our plan for implementation goes as follows. Again, I was trained in letters already, so I was able to go through the training to be a trainer. Once that is complete, which will be very soon here, we're going to start our implementation. And our focus for this year is just units 1 and 2 in this big old book right here. Okay? So units 1 and 2 only. What unit 1 and 2 is going to consist of, I'll show you in a minute, but who's going to attend, I wanted to tell you first. So all staff in grades K through 3 are going to take part in this training. And that means all staff. We're going to have our teachers, our principals, which is going to be amazing. Getting principals on board is so huge. Now, they don't have to be like professors of it, but they're going to know enough about it so they can help guide meetings, understand where we're going, where we've been, and where we want to be in the next 3 years with all of our students reading at a level. We're going to have our Title I teachers. They're a huge asset in all our buildings. We're going to have our English language arts teachers and our school psychs. We want to try to keep this somewhat smaller and intimate so we can have a nice exchange back and forth, asking questions, doing activities together, doing things like we did where we do some simulations, letting them practice things, try things out. So we're going to try to have about 7 to 10 members per group in each session. And we're going to have 24 sessions per unit. So I'm going to be pretty busy. I'm going to be saying the same thing 24 times. So hopefully by the 24th time, it's better than the first time. This is my first time doing this, so hopefully I'm not doing so bad. All right, so, and then there'll be 6-hour sessions each. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide the 6-hour session up. So there'll be 3 hours of workshop and 3 hours where it's going to be they can apply what they're doing. So the 3-hour workshop is going to be where I'm leading and facilitating the training, and we'll do like breakout sessions, and we'll do things where they can apply what they've learned. But then after that, each person that's going to be involved in this, each staff member, is going to have something that looks like this. And this is where they're going to have a chance to apply what they've learned with students in their class. They have to select between 1 to 3 students to try the things we do. Because it's no good to just sit and get and forget, right? Sit, get leads to forget. We want you to get in there and do. So After we do the sessions, they're going to have time to start planning how they're going to implement these things. I'll be around to help them, and then they're going to really implement these with students and see how it works, reflect, and we come back the next time to discuss. All right, next slide, please. Oh, you're there.
Oh, we're good.
Okay.
You
That
can
means
go
we're
quickly
good.
through this.
I'm sorry. And so Unit 1, what it's going to look like is the following. It's going to be basically about the challenges of learning to read. Because many of us as teachers, it wasn't a challenge. So we need to really understand how hard it can be for a lot of our students. So we're going to talk about the common types of reading difficulties. We're going to talk about what I just showed you, the simple view of reading, and understand that a little bit more. We're going to talk about the brain, and like I said, where reading takes place in the brain, based on research. Lastly, we're going to talk about the skills to support that reading development. In Unit 2, we're going to talk about the speech sounds, those phonemes. And so we're going to talk about phonology, which is all the big umbrella of sounds. Like I said, from your words to your syllables to individual sounds. We're going to talk about how that's related to reading and spelling. We're going to talk about why phonemic awareness, manipulating the smallest units of sound, why that's so important to reading and writing. We're going to talk about how phonological skills should be taught. So it's great to know that it's important, but how do I teach this? How do I know I'm doing it the way that all my students are going to get meaning out of it? And lastly, we're going to teach them how to use an assessment. We're going to deliver an assessment, not only deliver it, but analyze the results and then plan where we would intervene. Because intervention is where we want to be, to close that gap. So, lastly, our plan, this is our expectations. So this is our goal. What are the staff members participating expect to do, and what am I as the facilitator going to do? So staff is expected to attend and actively participate in all the face-to-face training sessions for those units that we have 1 and 2. They're going to complete those outside readings and those outside activities that they have. There's actually a book like this I said that they'll read in. There's an online component where there's videos to help them walk through some of the things that were in the readings, and there's even assessments. It's a lot, but the teachers are really ready to do this, we believe, and they're going to have buy-in, and it's going to be amazing. And then also they'll do those application exercises. They're going to apply what they've learned, like I said, and do those bridge to practice activities. And then as my role as a facilitator is I'm going to hopefully provide engaging, amazing lessons and training sessions where I can explain the concepts within the letters manual to walk them through anything they might not have understood and get them ready for the next things they'll be doing. I'll grade all of their bridge to practice activities, so the things they did to implement, and I'll help them with any feedback they need, any questions about how things went for them, any misunderstandings about what they delivered or didn't deliver, any assessments, so that they can feel that they're supported and they're not just out on an island waiting for the next session. So why are we doing this? What do we expect? It's really going to lead into what Amy talks about. We're expecting. We believe it in our heart and our guts, that through this program, staff will be equipped with the knowledge, resources, and supports necessary in order to provide effective literacy instruction to all the students. Again, we have amazing teachers, and when we know more, we can do even more. Imagine what the students who are on level right now can do when we give them that much more instruction. Imagine what the students who are slightly below can do when we give them that much more instruction. Imagine what our whole district can do. So that's going to be exciting. Our students are going to then become proficient, confident readers who not only can exhibit the strong comprehension skills that we talked about, but they'll have greater knowledge across the content areas. We want reading, the goal of reading is to understand, and then to not only understand, but to get knowledge and use it. And that's what Amy's going to talk about in just a minute. We want them to be able to do all the things we know they can do. The best way to do that is give them strategies to access the text. And then finally, our teachers are going to have a greater sense of confidence in regard to literacy instruction. They're going to believe in what they're doing and know in their hearts they're doing what's very best based on the science of reading. And their students are going to have a greater love for reading and learning. That's what we want. So that was my part. Hope I didn't take too long. If anyone has any questions, fire away. You're ready.
I have a lot of them. I don't know that we need to address them all now, but some of them are like basic. So why school psychs? Why are they included in this first, in this group of trainees?
May I address?
Please.
So what's really nice is when we have a student that might be thought of as having a disability, it's nice for our psychs to be able to guide that discussion as well and say, well, what have you done? Because oftentimes what happens in meetings is we say, our student has a reading comprehension problem. And we're like, okay, we'll work on making inferences. And our psychs might not have been trained in this. So what we say is, there's always an underlying issue, almost always. So we say, okay, why is he or she not comprehending? how accurate is he or she? Okay, what sounds do they know or not know? What connections to letters and sounds do they know or not know? And we can provide better intervention before we necessarily say, well, they don't know this, so I'm going to put them on an IEP without doing anything to know what they might need, right? So we want to give intervention early and often before it gets to go on and on and on. And oftentimes our psychs can help us do that. So it's huge for them. Did that help?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll take turns. If somebody
Rapid
I
fire.
was wondering, do we test for dyslexia? Or is that something we can do?
You know what's funny is I was just watching a webinar on this. There isn't a hard and fast rule on testing for dyslexia, but this comes from Ms. Tyndall. She is steeped in this. She's really big in the science of reading. Jan Hasbrook and Tyndall. So this is actually Jan Hasbrook, I should say. She said it's not as important right now. Most efficient, I should say, official people that really know this stuff. It's not as important to know, is it dyslexia or not? It's, am I teaching the right things? And what we know about the brain research is teaching the way that we're going to learn in the science reading is what we want to do. It's not necessarily what it is, it's how we treat it. So right now that's what they're saying, because there isn't really a hard and fast way to test for it, but what we do know are there's myths about dyslexia. For instance, we think it means seeing things backwards. Not to get too word nerd for you, but lexia means language. Dys means there's a dysfunction. So it's really not understanding language. Dyslexia is a language processing issue, not
And
not a
that
sight
being
thing.
said, I do want to jump in with the law, though.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
starting next year, 22, 23, we as a school district in Ohio are required to screen for dyslexia. So not a lot of parameters have been set up. There's a lot of regulations that are in place. We will have screeners. We will do, but we haven't been given the guidance yet as a district. So this, like I said earlier, is going to lead directly to us being prepared and not scrambling to try to, reactively
Yeah.
train our staff.
I think that's the biggest goal, because what research is showing, again, even if there's not a hard and fast rule, it is dyslexia. We're going to do our best to screen for it, but we'll know, is there a reading difficulty present? And the sooner you can intervene, the better. The amount of time it takes to help a student who's in the 3rd or 4th grade that's behind, it's 2 hours extra a day. I don't know where it's going to come from. But if we intervene early in kindergarten, 1st grade, we can close gaps so quickly that it frees up the time so that they can access all the information we need them to. And they're going to love school so much more. So I think that's where we really want to be.
I heard you correctly. We don't have a really good test for dyslexia, and we have to start testing next year.
We need to
So
start
we-
screening, correct? We and every other
We
district
don't
in
have a really
Ohio.
good way to figure out if someone's dyslexic, but we have to start screening for it next year. So that's just something we're going to need to pay attention to.
Sure. And they are going to provide us a list of what we are allowed and not allowed to use, what is regulated, what is official per the state of Ohio. So
Sure.
it's not going to be local discretion, per se.
And again,
When that comes forward, we'll want to evaluate it. Because
Absolutely.
I don't want to be stuck
Right.
doing a bunch of testing. I'm sorry. I don't want to be stuck doing a bunch of screening
Correct.
that we don't even know if it's evaluating it properly.
In-
But I don't want to get sidetracked.
No, I think that's a great point. In the webinar I did watch, they said, although there might not be a perfect screener, there's things you do look for, and it actually is a lot of the lower end of the rope. So they look for phonemic awareness. Do you have phonemic awareness? Do you have word knowledge? Do you have the ability to recognize the phonics, the letter-sound relationships, I should say? Those things are huge. Do you understand sentences that are spoken to? Are you able to retrieve words and use them correctly, or do you kind of struggle with getting words? Those are all signs.
Right.
And
I
those are
think
things they do assess a lot
The
of
most
times.
important thing is then what do we do with the data? We can
Absolutely.
screen them.
Exactly.
If we're not going to do something with intervening, it's a waste of everybody's time. So that's really where this comes into play.
Yeah.
We need to find out where the deficiencies are anyhow. So
Right.
let's tie it all together, build on those, any challenges, deficiencies we see, and kind of kill two birds there with one stone.
Anything else?
What I see, and I go way back, so, a lot of different things. Key words that I heard are explicit, sequential, and systematic.
You got it.
so many things that we've done in education, whether it be reading or whatever else we've done. And there's a couple of other keywords. Obviously, a person has to be motivated to want to learn it. Obviously, you're very motivated. And I think that's a good example for teachers. A couple of other things, and the most important word, I think, in all new strategies is fidelity. I mean, you can teach it to them, you can do anything, but if they don't go back out there and do it with fidelity on a daily basis, it just eventually weakens over time. A couple of other things. I like the approach of small steps. You're not taking everything in one fell swoop. You're doing unit 1, we're going to do this. You're going to do unit 2, we're going to do that. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to go out and we're going to apply it. Because if we don't apply it, I've been to innumerable workshops where they were great, and John went out there and did what? Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, because other things got in the way. Small steps, application, feedback. So I think the research base is there, the strategies are there, the implementation process is there. The only thing I would question, and this is not question, but at least make a comment, there are going to be people who are going to jump on right away. Whether that's because where they're at in their career, whatever it is, and there are others who are going to say, I've heard it. So I know this is a different approach to that, and I was like frightened by the simulation. Because I went to kindergarten knowing more Polish than English, because my grandparents lived with us. And to this day, one of the most difficult tasks for me is to read and comprehend. I take a lot of notes. I can read a paragraph, put it down, you could ask me about that paragraph. In 10 minutes, I couldn't tell you. But if I wrote it down and reread it, I could tell you. Whether that's dyslexia or not, I don't know. It's something.
What if it was in Polish?
Yeah.
Back in the old days, me, not so much anymore. I can still understand it, but couldn't read it at all. So the approach is a wonderful approach. And I know with your motivation and everything, it will be successful. But those are the things that I picked up on in the presentation.
Thank you.
And Steve, I am sure you welcome any of the board members to sit in any of your sessions.
Oh, it would
Can
be awesome. I
assure
can
them
make
that?
some
Yes.
extra materials.
You would love it.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about, you will have people that are apprehensive, and that makes sense. But I think what we want to do is not be a sit, get, and forget. We want this to be a cultural change, and truly, we're doing a lot of that in our district, which we know will take time, and that's why we're doing this for several years.
Right.
Because we know, with all the best intentions, when things get mucky, you go back to what you know, what's comfortable. So we've got to get a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm going to quote my show again. Ted Lasso said, I love the guy, said learning something new is a lot like riding a horse the first time. If you're too comfortable, you're probably not doing it right. And I really like that. We're going to be uncomfortable for a while, but we're going to practice. We're going to support one another. We're going to get feedback so that eventually those things that are uncomfortable start to become more comfortable. And when you hit a time when you're uncomfortable in a situation in class, your first inclination won't be to throw this away. It'll be to cling to it because you know it works.
Right.
So we're hoping to get there.
Anything else for Steve?
I have a few.
Oh, go ahead.
I will, I promise I won't
No,
end
it's
them all.
okay.
I'll email them to you. But 2 more. You said there are 24 sessions, 6 hours apiece. Where on earth are we putting that in our teachers' days?
I can
Yes.
speak to that. So,
We have a plan.
the challenging part of any professional development, we know, is when do we get the teachers to actually have the time for PD? So we went through and we spent a lot of time breaking them into groups, and as Steve said, we didn't want to just bombard them. 6 hours of information, no time to practice, no time to process, go back to your classrooms. So for each of the sessions, we divided teachers to have 2 days per session. So they will cover one, they will be out of the classroom 2 days. The reason there are so many groups is because we have so many teachers that we're subbing them. So we have 7 to 10 a day. That's all we can sub right now.
So 2 days, how often?
They'll 2 times this year. We'll get through modules 1 and 2. So essentially 4 days. I can show you the schedule. I know it's a little convoluted to think that he's going to.
Yeah, if you could.
Absolutely.
Okay. The other question,
Yeah.
if we could go back to your lovely demonstration. You gave it examples of what we wouldn't do.
Right.
If we're looking, or pick your own,
Yeah.
I recognize this may not be the best
Right.
example. If you were going to show me actually what you would do.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of parts I know, but can you give me a sample of, like, a student looks at something
Right.
and they don't understand, what would you do with this
Beautiful.
new?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I would say is what we wouldn't do is give them a text, not in the early grades, K1, 2, like this. Meaning we wouldn't give them we would traditionally give them like where we don't have a controlled text. Because that's similar to math, where you've only taught addition and subtraction and you give them a worksheet that has long division. You would never do that. Like, they don't know how to do this yet. So we wouldn't do that here either. So I wouldn't first give them this book. What I would do is give explicit instruction on the phonics skills that we've taught so far, based on our scope and sequence in something like foundations. So we would talk about the letter sounds that we're doing sequentially. Typically, you would give 1 or 2 vowels and then several consonants, and you'd start to make word families with those. And so you start practicing what those sounds are. Now you introduce the letter and say, oh, you hear that sound? It's represented with this letter. Now let's blend some of those sounds, letters together. And you're just reading words in isolation, related. And then you're going to read some phrases. And then you'll start reading sentences. Then after that, you'll go ahead and you'll give them controlled text that only have the letter sounds that you've taught. Now, when they get into the passage and they're struggling, you would use the same strategies you taught in class, nothing new. So you'd say, oh, let's look at this word. Let's look at all of it. What is the first letter? But we're not going to stop there. What sound does it make? Can you blend that to the next letter sound? Do you see any chunks of digraphs or blends that we've taught? Now can you put the ending sound there? That's what we would do. Do you need to change the vowel sound? Because do we know 2 vowel sounds here if we've gotten that far? Do we know what a closed syllable is? What sound does a vowel make in a closed syllable? Oh, we could, if we gotten so far as to talk about schwas, which is that empty sound, like a sound. You know what? I don't think it makes either of these sounds, does it? It doesn't sound like the word. You've blended everything perfectly with these letter sounds. What about that schwa? So I'm giving them the skills that I want their brain to be doing. Because, again, I know we said we don't want to, we already talked about what we don't do, but looking at pictures and those things, they're obsolete. By the time you get in 3rd, 4th grade, pictures are gone, right? How many times have you looked at a book and gone, let me look at that picture, I'll figure that word out? I don't, maybe some do, but I look at parts of the word that I know. Is there a morpheme? Where's the syllable at? Can I break this word into those syllables and then read each letter sound, or what we call graphemes, together and then blend them? So those are the kind of things we would be doing. And there's a really nice way to do that through what they call an explicit phonics lesson in here. It's really detailed, but that's kind of part of it. Going over sounds, then doing word work, practicing that word work within just words, then phrases, then sentences, then a controlled text, and then prompting that way.
So are both, I've heard you mention Heggerty and Foundations, are those already both parts that we've already integrated into our classrooms?
Our teachers know both of them, yeah. And Heggerty is going to do the sounds. It's what they call teaching in the dark. There's no letters with it. It's hearing the sounds, because you need to hear sounds. And then after you do that, and it's not like you do that and you don't do any letters. It's just, that's part of your lesson. And then you go, those letters we've been learning, here are those sounds we've been learning. I apologize. Here are the letters that represent those sounds. So now when you see these letters, apply them to the sounds we just heard. So that's where you get into the foundations. But Heggerty is just the sounds.
I know Heggerty is fairly new, last 2 years maybe. When's Foundations? When do we implement that?
We've had that since I've been here, and this is my 9th year.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go in, you need anything else, by all means. And if they're long, and you're like, geez, I don't want to read this guy's email, so you can call me too. I can
Okay.
always give him my number.
I may.
Because I know I can write a mean email. I mean, it gets long. You're gonna be like, jeez. So.
You haven't seen my question.
Yeah, you're like, you haven't seen nothing yet, huh? But yeah, you feel free, email or call anytime.
Thank you.
Steve's a wonderful asset, as you can probably see, to the district. I couldn't think of a better trainer for the energy he has, the knowledge, the passion. So I am very excited to have our teachers learn from him and learn this content. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Steve's hard to follow, so I don't have my button, but I love standards, so we'll talk standards. So how about that? So we have been very busy. So we started off in, Aaron and I started talking in June and kind of figuring out where we needed to take this year. And in the last month and a half, our teachers and our administrators have been engaged in quite a bit of work surrounding standards in our reading, so our ELA, our reading and writing. And so how we started to approach this is we thought of the analogy of a marathon versus a sprint. This is not work that can be done in a single session or, one time. This is something that is taking us a long time because there's so many pieces to it. It's not just looking at a standard statement, it's really looking at the skills within that standard statement and figuring out what does that mean when I'm teaching. So we, in a marathon, if you're training for a race, you have to proactively plan, you have to figure out, where your race routes are, you're gonna have to plan your long runs. You have to have resources and tools in order to, new shoes and, your headphones and things like that. And then you need time to practice in order to get good and be ready. So that's what we're doing this year with our standards work and really honing in on all of the things that make up all of these documents that the state gives us to really be able to enhance our teaching and really proactively plan our lessons so our students can do the best they can. So in that planning piece, if you relate it to our work, we always start with the data and what is that data telling us? And so we started with ELA because it's an easy progression. So in your packet, skipping here, in your packet, the purple paper, our ELA standards, there's 10 reading, 10 writing, there's some foundational skills, there's language skills, there's speaking and listening standards. But what they all have is they're called anchor standards. And so those anchor standards go all the way from pre-K to 12. And so standard 1 is standard 1 all the way through pre-K to 12. So if it's talking about asking and answering questions in first grade as the number 1 reading standard, in 12th grade it's asking and answering questions, but of course it's at a different, level. So what we have here, so the great part about ODE is that they give us a lot of resources. You go on their website, you can get lost in the resources, but what our responsibility is as a district, as a staff, is to take those resources and know what where our students are here in Strongsville, and to synthesize all that information in order for us to develop curriculum maps, to, look at our lessons, design our lessons, and then ultimately get to student achievement and student growth. So that's the work that we're going to focus on all year. The blue paper in your packet, going back to the ELA, so again, starting with the ELA because it does have that vertical alignment for our pre-K to 5 students. And what we did was, within each anchor standard, it is broken down into, here's exactly what it looks like in first grade. Here's exactly what it looks like in second grade. But what we are finding is that this standard statement, as we're calling it, is not enough. It's very general. It gives you an idea of what you're supposed to teach, and it gives you a little bit of a progression between grade levels, but this is not the only end-all be-all standard that we have to look at, or the only resource we have to look at to be able to see at what level we have to teach our students. There's a lot of other resources that I didn't share with you. We have something that's called a model curriculum, and that really takes apart each standard and puts them together, lumps them together into some key details, a structure of a text, and it gives us some other guiding documents within that model curriculum to help us determine, again, where did students come from in the grade prior, what do we really have to hone in on in our grade, and then where are we taking, what should our students leave with when they leave our grade. There's things in here like a test blueprint. It tells us, what standards are more tested than others. We have content elaboration, test specifications that are telling us, again, what level and what depth, because you can say, hey, describe this character, and we all might think of describe as something different. But within our test specifications and these documents, it tells us exactly what does describe mean, because one of the things that we've talked about in buildings is getting on the same page and making sure we're all consistent with what we're teaching. So if we're going to Kinsner, we're teaching describing a character the same way as we are at Chapman or we are at Muraski. So that's one thing that we're really, really working on a lot this year, is getting teachers and staff from different buildings together and having these collaborative conversations, so they're not just with their isolated buildings, they're with other people. And then we also have performance level descriptors, because the students are tested, when they're tested in levels. So they could be proficient, they could be advanced, accelerated, and it gives us an idea of what each level is expected when our students are assessed to see if they've mastered a standard or not. So what we're in the process of doing, because there's so many documents, we have a binder, every teacher has a binder, that has all these documents, much like Steve's, but smaller, I think, but there's so much, and our teachers are like, these are great resources, but I'm clicking and clicking, and so we put them into one resource for them in a paper copy, because some people still like paper copies. But what we're doing right now, and it's not live on our website yet because we're still in the process of getting all these documents into the website, is all of our teachers will have access to all of these documents and all of the work that we're doing in one, clickable. They can, if they're preschool, you click on the preschool, it'll, open up and you can have all these documents. So we're also in the process of doing that. So when next year comes, we set our race day is, August 2022 right, 2021, 22. But that's our race day. That's where we want to start the ground running with all of this new work. We're still teaching this year, obviously. We're still doing all of the things. We're experimenting with, looking at some of the standards and adjusting our teaching now. But we really want to hit the ground running in August to say, this is what we're teaching. If I'm a first grade teacher, this is what I'm teaching, how I'm teaching it, and here's the depth I'm teaching it. So this will be all ready for them this year, going into next year. So then, if we're talking about, the time that we're spending in our PD days, so we have designated PD days. Our next one's in October here, coming up soon. We've spent a lot of time about how do you break down a standard. So we're calling it deconstructing a standard, and it's not an easy process. It's messy. It's challenging. Sometimes it results in a little bit of frustration because there is no right answer. There's not a document that says, this is exactly what you do. It's really based on our teachers collaborating, thoroughly analyzing these documents and determining what we have to do. So we created kind of like a breakdown sheet so we can really look at the standard, and we modeled this with our administrators first. So we started this work actually last year. So our administrators would have a background on how they could help support their teachers. So you go through the key standard or the key skills within the standard, because one standard statement might have 3 skills in it. So it's not just one thing you're teaching. We talked about, why are we teaching this to our students? Why is the reason that we have to teach analyzing this literary text? Then we turn those into student-friendly learning targets. So a lot of times, your kids might come home and say, oh, I can do this, and they talk about the standard of the day. So we're turning them into statements that students can understand, because in order for them to be successful, the first thing you have to give them is, what does success look like, right? So we're giving them an I can statement so they can say, I can do this, and they know what they're working towards. And in this document as well, all of those are clickable links, which are all the documents that we're trying to put together for them. So when we're doing this work, we've been doing a lot of different meetings for this. Our first kickoff day in August was a full day. We had all of our, pre-K to fifth grade teachers at Kinsner. We were all together. We had our administrators leading some small breakout rooms and grade level rooms. And that's where we really started unrolling what our plan was for the year. Our ultimate goal is that by the end of the year, we have updated curriculum maps. Everybody is on board with what each standard means and the depth that we're going to teach it. Some mentor texts that are going to go along, some readings that are going to go along with those to help teach those skills, and really a couple of different strategies that they can start to, like some go-to strategies to really hit that standard. We've also been meeting in grade level meetings. So we'll meet with the literacy coaches. Aaron and I will meet with a grade level at a time, and we just got through the last 3 weeks doing that. And that's where we gave them feedback on the work that they did on August. So we started our work, and we were just really getting into a couple standards. We didn't really get into, the length of all of the standards, but we started with about 5 standards to look at. We gave them feedback, and then again, teachers had time to collaborate and say, okay, now that we have this feedback and we have these documents and we found more guiding documents, now how can we adjust our learning targets so we really still know what we have to teach? A lot of, in our TBTs, or our teacher-based teams at our buildings, so grade level teams will get together, and their TBT coach might be there, or their administrator might be there, and they're working on, even though we're not fully into, this deconstructing process, they are starting that work and having those conversations now so they can practice with their own team and feel comfortable. We're also working on, there's a lot of work that we're doing the last month and a half, but we're also working on, we have math assessment design teams, and we have ELA assessment design teams. And so what we will do is we will meet just with math teachers. We'll go through this process with math this year. Looks a little different because the standards are, so linear. But they will be starting to look at their math standards, look at those progressions, look at the math documents that go with that. And then we'll be looking at our current common assessments that we have and revising those or enhancing those to include everything that we're learning this year. All of the skills that we might have, maybe we were missing one key skill in that standard, and that's why some of our scores are a little bit lower than we thought. So we're gonna be working on that, and those will be created this year as well. We also have the same thing for ELA. So that's starting next week, actually. Our math team is meeting, and then our first groups of ELA teams are meeting, and we're going to go through, we have a document that will walk them through their assessment to see if it's really matching the rigor of the standard and what the standard's saying. And then, like I said, October 18th, our second full PD day is coming up, and we're going to be working on stations where we can really get some collaboration about some critical standards that we commonly miss, that were lower in our scores. And so we're going to have these conversations about what does a retelling look like in first grade versus second versus third versus fifth. So it's a lot of time. We're discovering quite a bit. So just like Steve said before, when you know better, you do better. What we thought some of the standards meant or we interpreted, we're finding out that's not exactly what we thought. So we're finding out that the expectations of the standards are quite deep. For a third grader, this is an example of a third grade standard of RI means reading informational text, RL means reading literature, but the idea or the skills, this standard is the same. It looks the same in both literature and informational text with a little bit of difference. But if you look at RL 3.6, it says describe the difference between points of view in texts, particularly first and third person narration. So typically what we would do in a classroom, what would be, here's a reading, is this told in the first person or is it told in the third person? And we would assess the kids, do you know the difference between first and third person? When digging into this standard more, first of all, describe in itself has a definition by the state of Ohio, and there's like 3 skills within what describe means. You have to talk about attributes, you have to have vivid language, you have to have text evidence. So that sounds and looks a little different than this is first and this is third. But what this standard is really asking third graders to do is to read two different texts. So that's a skill in itself. Read these two texts. One, the narration is first person, one, the narration is third person. What is the difference in what they're saying and their perspective in their text? That's different than first person, third person. So that's what we're discovering. And, we keep saying to our teachers, it's okay, we're finding this out, we're learning from it, but now, moving forward, now we know. Now we know that we have to really deconstruct these standards at a really deep level to see what we're expecting. We're also kind of seeing, how well are we doing with these standards, and how are our students demonstrating mastery on our state tests? They're not the end-all, be-all, but that gives us a good idea of where our students are showing how much they know according to the state. So what we did with this standard, I talked about asking and answering questions before as the number one reading standard. And so 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, you can kind of see the breakdown of where we are. And this is one of those standards that we fall short a little bit. If you look at 3rd grade, there were 3 questions asked. One of the questions, only 24% of our kids in the district could answer or show mastery of that standard. But then the other 2 are in the 70s. So that's giving us pause to say, what's going on? Is it the question? Is it how we're teaching it? What is it? Same with 4th and 5th grade, on the lower end of our score. So we're definitely seeing how are our kids scoring with certain standards. Certain standards, this one is a big one that we've talked about. We're also seeing where are some possible gaps. So here's, this is talking about determining a theme in a story and then summarizing that story. And across, 3rd through 5th grade, and again, we only have 3rd through 5th grade because these are our state assessments. We don't have state assessments for K1, 2. But you will see that in 3rd grade, we're scoring 47.5%, 4th grade 34%, and then we jump to 80%. So what are we doing in 5th grade that we can maybe take down to the 4th and 3rd grade, teachers to say, wow, this really worked. And then the other thing that we're noticing are, what kind of trends are we seeing? And so here's, an easy standard that we think, again, that we got this. It's describing characters in a story. But what we're seeing when we're assessed on it is the teachers will say, well, we talk about characters in a story all the time, and we describe it, and we, have graphic organizers. But again, reading into this standard, it's not just this is, there's a, dog in the story and they're going to the library and, it's not as easy as that. It's talking about how are characters feeling? What are their character traits? How does that affect what they're doing in the story? Again, sounds and looks much different than just give me the character setting problem solution. So we're discovering a lot of things. The other big thing that we're focusing on is called depth of knowledge. It's really how deep do we understand content. So there's skills in the standard statements, like what are we going to do? But this is how deep do we want kids to understand the content. And there's 4 different depth of knowledge levels. So depth of knowledge 1 is basically recall and facts. Depth of knowledge 2 is application, is applying what those facts are to something else. Depth of knowledge 3 is strategic thinking, where we're getting into inferencing and there's not a right answer, there's not one pathway to go. And then depth of knowledge 4 is really where we're starting to create things, and here's the problem now, how can we improve things in the future, what can we create? So we're talking a lot about depth of knowledge because that is helping our teachers to, it's not knowing more facts or more stuff, for lack of a better word, but it's how do we think about those facts and how do we think about that stuff to create something new. We want our kids to be thinking instead of thinking like beginners, we want them to think like expert thinkers. So that's really what the depth of knowledge is telling us. So I don't have a Wheel of Fortune game, but I do have some game show pictures here. I have a very good friend who works for ODE, and this is one way that he teaches what the difference is in the different levels of depth of knowledge. So just so, to put it to a game show, depth of knowledge is a recall of facts. It's one right answer. So that's like the game Jeopardy, you know, you have, you know, what's the answer, and you have one answer. Depth of knowledge 2 is like the Price is Right. You have to know prices of things in order to apply it to the game that you're playing in Price is Right. There's still probably one right answer or one right approach, and it's, you know, in math it looks like routine rote problems. You know, you're gonna, you know, do this problem one way. Depth of knowledge 3 is like the show Survivor, where you have to now take pieces of different clues and evidence, and you have to decide what your next move is. What are you going to do? So there's not necessarily one right answer. There's not necessarily one right approach. You have to decide based on all the things that you have around you. And then the one thing to know, and we told our teachers this, and this again comes from this. What's that? I didn't skip 4 because I wanted to do 2 and 3. I didn't skip 4. 4's coming. Just wait. But what we told our teachers are 83% of the assessment items or the standards are assessed at a depth of knowledge 3 by the 6th grade. So 83% of how they are being assessed on their end of the year tests are at a depth of knowledge 3 by 6th grade. And if we're only teaching, here's first person and here's third person, that's not getting to that depth of knowledge 3. That's not even getting to 2. In math, 79% of the standards that are assessed, that's the math tests, are at a depth of knowledge 2. A lot of times in math, you can't go to a depth of knowledge 3 because, you know, they want to see if you can compute the answer. There's very few that are depth of knowledge 3 in math. Here's depth of knowledge 4. This one's like Shark Tank. So again, it's taking something that you have now and creating something new, coming up with a new solution to a problem, real world applications. So just to kind of put this into context of something that we all might be familiar with, the story of Little Red Riding Hood. If we were to, you know, have a lesson in class and we were talking about depth of knowledge 1, we might say things like, who are the main characters in the story? How does the story end? One right answer, we have some facts, right? Depth of knowledge 2 with Little Red Riding Hood might be, retell the story in your own words. Or compare Little Red Riding Hood to the wolf. How are they alike? How are they different? So you're taking what you know about the Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf, and you're applying it with similarities and differences. With depth of knowledge 3, this would be determine the theme. So that's one of those standards that we're really working heavily on. Determine the theme of Little Red Riding Hood based on the events in the story. So now you have to know, you know, the one thing about depth of knowledge 3 in reading is that you have to understand the entirety of that text to be able to pull out information that goes along with what they're asking. So that's difficult, especially we're talking with Steve with letters and reading. That's why these things go hand in hand so well. But they have to understand the whole text, not just pieces. Another way to say this would be, what's your opinion of the wolf's cleverness? So not one right answer, but they have to justify it using the text evidence in the text. Depth of knowledge 4 would be read 2 more stories, so they could pick. Read 2 more stories with wolves as the main character, and then what do you notice about the wolves in all these stories? Are they all like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, or are they different? And then you have to use all 3 texts, and you have to support your answer using all 3 texts of why they might be the same, why they might be different. Why is the author using a wolf each time, you know, as that character? So that's a lot of the work that we're doing with depth of knowledge. It's kind of difficult to wrap your head around sometimes because, again, the standards, we're using all these documents, and we're ourselves doing depth of knowledge 3 and 4 work when we're doing our standards work, because we are synthesizing all of these things and putting them together and trying to, you know, make sure that we're, you know, making these curriculum maps and, you know, our standard sheets to match that. So how does this change what we're going to do? How does this change it all? Again, we went through this with our administrators. We're still going through it with our administrators so they can help support the conversations in their teacher-based team meetings for their whole staff. We want them to have, you know, just like letters, we want our administrators and principals to have that understanding of this standard. So if a teacher comes to them and says, I'm really having trouble with this standard, I don't know what it's asking me, you know, my team's not here or whatever, the principals can help facilitate those conversations. And we want them to be able to talk about standards, again, not as an expert level, because they can't possibly know every standard for every grade level, but what that means, what the process is, what the complexity of the standards are, and be able to provide them feedback. So if they're, going in the wrong direction, they can say, hey, wait, let's look at this document. What is this telling us? What depth of knowledge is this? So that's what it means for our administrators, for our teachers. I think this has been, one of the best things that we have is they've been able to collaborate, all 5 buildings plus the preschool, because the preschool standards, they have standards that go right along with what we're doing. So they have more play-based standards at the beginning of their standards, but then they do have reading standards, and they directly align. So when we're talking about retelling in kindergarten, we are also with our preschool talking about what retell looks like in preschool. So that's been great to vertically have these conversations, but also across our elementary buildings so we can get different perspectives. Teachers are starting to talk and proactively design lessons to be able to incorporate not only the skills that they have to, but the depth and the complexity of the standards. And we're really looking to say, look at the standard and say, how can I engage my kids better with knowing what the skills and the depth of knowledge is? How can I have them, represent something in a different way so they can demonstrate mastery that way? So we're really trying to get them to think differently, proactively when they plan using these standards. And then the biggest thing is we want kids to be able to engage deeper in content. So not surface level where they just read and answer questions. That's not, we want to create, expert thinkers as well. We want them prepared for life after us, after elementary school, after they get out of Strongsville City School. So it's really about getting them to engage in content so they can discover more things. And then what does this mean for our students? Engaging in more rigorous activities. So kids being able to collaborate, being able to look at different resources to be able to demonstrate their mastery on that. The one big thing that we talk about a lot is creating critical thinkers and problem solvers. That's really what we want, because if we can have critical thinkers and problem solvers and kids who can solve their way and be resilient, solve their way out of something, then we've done some really good work. So by doing all of this work, that helps them to come up with activities where kids can be problem solvers instead of, just answer these, this question or fill out this graphic organizer. And then also creating more authentic opportunities for them to be able to show us what they know. So it's not just, here's my paper test. It's, how could I, here's a question and I have to come up with the research behind it and come up with the solution. So how can they better demonstrate to us what they know? And then where we're going next from here is we want to connect all this standard work to our assessments. That's going to be our assessment team. So standards, and then we look at the assessments, and then we're able to plan for what the students need to know at the end of those assessments. Create our curriculum map so there's cohesive instruction in all buildings. We still want to give teachers the autonomy of how to teach, but there are some things that we want across third grade. Here's what you're expected to do with this standard. Again, aligning those assessments to that rigor, to that depth of knowledge that it needs to be. If the standard is telling us that they're going to assess at a depth of knowledge 3, then we need our instruction to match that. We need our assessments to match that. And then creating those common instructional experiences. So again, if you're going to a different building, all the third grades have similar experiences with their learning. So lots going on so far.
Any questions for Amy?
Can you give me an example of create common instructional experiences? What should a parent or a child expect?
So I think what we're trying to get away from is the traditional, the teacher's going to talk in the front of the room, here's the content, now do something, at your seat individually. We really want to have, like I said, maybe there's a question posed and there's no direct instruction right away, but the kids are able to go on a video and they're learning some information. Then they're going to share it with their friend. They're going to go look at this podcast. They're going to listen to this podcast, and they're going to share their information with their friend. And the kids are doing the learning, and they're sharing together. And then the teacher is really the facilitator. They're not the one who's, up here lecturing to everybody. It's really them facilitating those critical thinking skills up with our kids and guiding their thinking so they can come up with the solutions or the questions.
But
And
how
I-
are we going to do that across, and maybe I'm not misunderstanding common, but how do we do that across all the elementary buildings?
And how I interpret that, if I can jump in quickly, is similar to the example that Amy mentioned earlier, in that if we don't know the depth of the standard, we may be teaching it completely different from one classroom to another. So we may have a third grade, point of view, is this book first or third person? A different third grade teacher going to the depth and rigor that the standard actually intends. So getting everybody to do the work and be on the same page creates the common instructional experiences. In my mind, that means they're taught to the same depth. So you don't have a classroom where they're doing everything DOK1, define this word, here's your spelling test, versus, another one where they're doing project-based learning and STEM and all of the great things that Amy just talked about. But we know here's the level of the standard, here's where we need to teach.
And there are some strategies that work very well, and some of our teachers are implementing that. So on our curriculum map, we would like to say, here's a strategy 2 or 3, that really work well with this standard. And so if someone doesn't know what, a 3-level guide is, or they don't know what reciprocal teaching is, we can put that in our curriculum map, and we can do, have everybody on the same page as far as instructional strategies as well. Because sometimes there's a strategy is a go-to strategy for a particular standard. And we want all of our teachers to know what those strategies are for those standards to make sure that kids are experiencing that in all the buildings.
I have a follow-up question to that. So earlier you mentioned about the I can statements. So is that something we would expect, if my son who's in 2nd grade goes and talks to his buddies at Kinsner, they can both have that common language of saying, I can do this. I mean, this conversation is making me laugh in my head as if my 7-year-old son's going to do that. But
I did this at Kinsner.
hypothetically, but they would have that common language, and potentially the teacher could have used the same strategy that was provided in said resource.
That would be the ultimate goal.
That is the vision. Okay.
And it might not be like on the same exact day,
Sure,
but we
sure.
want it within the same time frame, give or take a week or 2 or whatever. Here's what we're doing, main idea and details this 2 weeks. And so they would see the learning targets that they're making, the I can statements are going to be right in the maps. So kids can see it, so teachers know exactly they don't even have to think about it because we've already done the work prior.
Thank you.
Is it fair, and again, not as a generalization, is it fair that the depth of knowledges also go by grade? I mean, 1st grade, you're going to spend more on depth of knowledge 1 so that you have the foundation to get deeper 2nd grade, or is that not a fair way to look at it?
Not necessarily. So that was a misconception by some of our teachers as well. I teach kindergarten. How could they get to, comparing and contrasting at a depth of knowledge 2? Well, students can do that in kindergarten, but it might look different. It might be them retelling you, the similarities and difference rather than writing it in an early grade. So there are maybe more depth of knowledge 1 at the, lower levels, but there are still some 2s or 3s that are in those standards at kindergarten and 1st grade level. That's why we have to look at it and really, pick it apart to see what the words are saying, what the documents are telling us.
Okay.
I'm good.
You're good.
At 9:15.
Unpacking the standards is always a fun task.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know
You're
when
lying.
you and I started, John, yes, with Common Core Standards before
Yeah.
you left. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a process, and as you can see, it takes a ton of time.
It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's going
We're
to take
s-
a long time to get to that point.
And to do it well.
Consistently.
We've had teachers say, can't you just give us some other district's map? Isn't there
Right.
something out there that we could just have? Probably, but if they don't put the time and the effort and do all of this work, they're still going to teach the same way using somebody else's map. So that's really the whole heart and intention of this. So again, I want to commend Amy. You can see all of the work that, I mean, she's already put in by October. It's going to continue. We're so lucky to have her in this role. So again, thank you for supporting that. That is all we have this evening for our presentation. We greatly appreciate your time and your interest.
I just, if I could, I just want to make a couple comments. As, you know, working with these ladies and with Steve, the amount of time, like Erin shared, and effort that's put into this, I mean, it really is a thinking process, and thinking through how are we going to present this? How are we going to share this? What resources do our principals need to lead this work? You know, meeting with TBT coaches, and, you know, the blessing of having our new positions and all of the people, it's great because we have all of these people, but it's also a challenge because we want to make sure that we're all moving together in the same way and saying the same things and having that same language. And, you know, just to kind of go back to the heart of what we do and making sure that people truly understand the standards takes so much time. And we've realized that maybe we've not done that. We haven't had the time to truly do that. And, you know, I want to go back to something that Steve shared through his letters training. You saw that the whole first unit was all about the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And standards are no different. We need to make sure that our teachers truly go through this process to understand, oh, and have that light bulb moment. Because, you know, we can't always be right next to them, guiding them. We want them to find meaning in it, to understand the process, and then to hopefully see that meaning and continue that on their own, and build their understanding and continue to kind of go through all of the steps that Amy shared. And as John mentioned, the fidelity of this is so important. You know, we are trying to build a system, and to do that well, we need to be on the same page. The amount of meetings we've had together and kind of talking it over just ourselves and how we're going to do this, and we've had moments of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do next? But these ladies have taken the feedback that our teachers have given from the first PD. We have gone through it. That's why DOK is now so important. Teachers connected to that. They want more of that, so that's what we're bringing to October. I mean, we have been planning the October PD since the August one ended, just so that we can so proactively be ready to address any concerns and any questions, helping our leaders, guiding them through that, preparing them to lead this work. So, you know, again, it's a process, it's a slow process, but we're going to get there. And I'm truly confident in the people that we have working on this, and again, just can't commend them enough. You can see their passion, you can see their excitement in this, and I think we're moving in a great direction. So thank you. 9 years.
We did 9 presentations. It was awesome. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
I want to get a 10 next time.
9 what?
We'll talk. Thank you.
We need some feedback, John. How do we get to a 10?
How do we get to a 10 for next time?
Treats.
I'm reserving that.
I like that.
For the next time.
Hunger for more.
Always room to improve.
9.1.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. That's better.
I would, a couple of quick comments or questions. One, I'm curious if we've thought about, we're going to do all of the training, and then we have new teachers coming on board, and those new teachers aren't, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but I guess it's a coin flip on whether they are or aren't going to come in with that training. So we need to think about how we're going to do that, because that's going to happen. Are we going to record your training sessions?
You
You
know,
like
that-
webinars, et cetera, and that, you know, we're going to have issues where people are sick, we're going to have those kinds of issues, and
Sure.
Good point.
it becomes a repository. Maybe not the first one, you said you're going to get better.
Maybe
So
not the
maybe
first
in the
23
middle.
times, but.
Maybe in the middle or the second last one.
Yeah.
But that's something to think about, is how can we time shift? One of the things that we discussed as a board or board level goals, and when we had our earlier retreat, you know, quite honestly, we put some lines in the sand about science of reading, et cetera. And so everything we've done, for me, just reconfirms that at a board level, this is a goal. So I don't want to say this is how we're going to measure it. I'd like feedback on how we're going to measure it, but we owe a commitment to ourselves and to the community. We are putting an extraordinary amount of resources into this, whether it be substitute costs, whether it be training costs, time, all of that. We need to be able, you know, the same way we have standards and we have to measure by them. I'd like a follow-up on how do we measure that. I know one of the discussions was, and help me if anyone else remembers it better, but Cameron talked about how if a student gets off track, it's hard to, it's hard to make sure that they get back on track. And so that would be something as a metric to say, this is how we're doing it now. And if we do, and it sounds like it's a 3-year process, but when we're done with that 3-year investment and everybody is as infectious as Steve is, or
Yikes.
infected, then we should see we should have those measurements and we should be able to predict that they will go down or get better, or however we want to define that. I don't think that's enough. I think we need to think about more ways to address that measurement issue of that. I mean, anecdotally, you know, I've heard, you know, and I'm not up to date on it. You know, it used to be phonics or whole language, right?
Right.
And now it seems like science of reading, et cetera. I don't believe it's a fad, but you know, if you imagine all the things in education that have ended up being fads and all the things in education that have stuck and have been tried and true, there's a lot more in the fad corner than there is in the tried and true. But it seems like everything we're doing has a reasonableness to it.
It's a strong research backing. I know the simple view of reading, just as a quick side note, 1987 was when it was actually coined, it was proven, so it's not new, as Steve said. So I wholeheartedly agree. We have whole states that are jumping on board because they're seeing the huge gains. And Ohio is headed in that direction.
And at the end of the day, I think sometimes we get caught up in all of that. What we want to do as a district, what we want to do in Strongsville is teach our children to read. And to teach them, you know, the idea of teaching them to read better all the time is a worthy goal. So I just want to kind of pursue that. And then, again, kudos to everyone. It was infectious, and I think it proved the point of changing our model for work sessions. I'd like the code. I want to decipher it.
You want to know what's funny about this code? My wife and I were expecting our second child, who was a boy. And I was like, this is how much of a word dork I am. I'm like, how should we do this? And my grandpa likes playing little word puzzles. I'm like, I'm going to say, Grandpa, I got this new puzzle. You want to try it out? And the code was, we're having a baby. And he was like, oh, we are. And he had a baby. He was like, it was so cute. It was so fun. So then I'm like, we should do it like this. But I do have the code. You can take this one home.
You also made the literacy coaches and me do that.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yes, you did.
I got this new activity here. It was pretty funny. But
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out if it's shape-based or what it is.
yeah,
but-
you know what? I just looked up weird codes or something like that, and I found it.
Do you have a snowman one? Because Halloween will be over
Oh, that would be
soon.
good. Yeah.
So I have nothing else, but thank you very much for your time. I know
Thank
it's
you.
long.
Thank you all.
and
Thank you all.
Nice
Appreciate
job, and we look forward to keeping the dialogue going and keeping the, it's a worthy project.
Very much so.
Thank you.
Hearing,
You can be dismissed.
a
Thank
hammer?
you all for your time and preparation.
Thanks, appreciate it.
You stay. I don't know. I have a feeling. I know, right? Giddy with power. Continue. All right. I will continue with the superintendent's report. Under Human Resources this evening, we have the settlement agreement. Here, be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Education enters into a settlement agreement, the terms of which have been reduced to writing and provided to the board, and this does require a vote.
do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Motion by Mrs. Hausum, second by Mr. Kapinski. Any discussion? We've all had an opportunity to read the settlement agreement and done our homework and had all of our questions answered. Hearing no other discussion, Mr. Anagnostou.
Mrs. Hausum,
Yes.
Mr. Kropinski,
Yes.
Mr. Miko,
Yes.
Mrs. Bissell,
Yes.
and Mrs. Sodi.
Yes.
Motion carries. Any other updates or comments?
I do have a couple updates. Just as a reminder, there is no school for students tomorrow, so make sure that you're aware of that. And I also want to just share that this weekend is homecoming for our students. I was texting with Mr. Wingler earlier, and we're hoping that if Saturday brings no rain, that it's going to be outside and our students can thoroughly enjoy the evening. But they will make that call in the morning if it needs to be moved indoors, so we do have an alternate plan. So I just want to, wish all of our students a great homecoming weekend, be safe, and hopefully they enjoy their time. And that is all of my updates right now.
I just would like to compliment you. You've done a great job running the meeting. You've set a new standard.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
And the fact that you single-handedly made sure the students don't have school tomorrow, take credit for it
Yeah, there you
and
go.
enjoy it.
No school.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Board of Education other, does anybody have any Board of Education others?
No.
So we do have homecoming. We have the football game on Friday, so go Mustangs.
Absolutely.
Next on our agenda is executive session for the reasons of,
To consider the employment of a public employee or official, to consider the discipline of a public employee or official, and also to review negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
and litigation.
And litigation.
And litigation.
Okay.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I will second.
Motion by Mrs. Hausum, second by Mr. Kropinski. Any discussion? Hearing none. Would you take the roll?
Mrs. Hausum,
Yes.
Mr. Kropinski,
Yes.
Mr. Miko,
Yes?
Mrs. Bissell,
Yes.
and Mrs. Sodi.
Yes.
Motion carries. We will enter into executive session at 9:30. We have no expectation of further business. Thank you for your attention and have a good evening.